Right, back live with you tonight here on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. The country's unemployment rate has increased for the first time in more than a year as power cuts led to slower economic growth and poor investor confidence. The official joblessness rate climbed to 32.9% in the first 3 months of the year from 32.7% in the previous quarter. We are joined now by Economist Chifipa Mhango as well as Federation of Unions of South Africa Deputy Secretary General Ashley Benjamin. And we are taking your thoughts tonight on 072-110-5584. The quarterly labor force surveys, do you think they help us understand the unemployment situation in the country and helping us do anything about it? What are your thoughts, certainly, with the number of these surveys that have been released so far? Gentlemen, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight. Chifipa, let me start with you exactly with that question. What does a quarterly labor force survey really show us? What does it tell us? We've just seen one now. It's out. We've seen one in the previous quarter and many other quarters before that.
Well, it's very clear that it is telling us that the economy is really going through a lot of turbulence with regard to the numbers. If you see an environment in which unemployment is rising, despite of the fact that it's just a marginal 0.2% increase. But if we translate that to numbers in terms of the number of unemployed increasing by 179,000, that tells you that a lot needs to be done in terms of trying to reverse these figures going forward. I think the challenge I'm seeing here is that these numbers are coming in mainly attributed to what's happening in the mining, manufacturing, and as well as the construction sector, where we've seen a massive decline in terms of the contribution towards this large number. So it's quite a concerning situation in terms of how the economy is actually moving from the third quarter figures point of view.
Yeah. Ashley, when we say in real numbers, unemployment is sitting at 42%, or whatever we want to look at, or when we look at it and say there are people who are available to work, in other words, of the age and of health that they are able to work, but they are not currently working, and 3.3 million of them are discouraged work seekers, and there are others who are sitting for various other reasons, sitting at about 0.7 million. What does it tell us about what we are not doing that we're actually supposed to be doing as a country, especially in the economy?
Well, thank you, Thabo. Good evening. Good evening to the viewers. No, the unemployment crisis, it's a serious matter for us in South Africa. That's what we refer to as organized labor as the ticking time bomb, in particular youth unemployment. It is a serious problem. Although we've seen a slow positive increase of youth employment by about 28,000, but more needs to be done on a bigger scale to eradicate unemployment, poverty and inequality. But I think the challenge is that we need real economic growth. Real growth will alleviate all these challenges of unemployment. Only when we see real economic growth will the economy grow at a pace where it will absorb jobs. But we see currently it's devastating. It is really devastating. Although we've seen some positive figures that the number of employed persons increased by 258,000 in the last quarter. But equally, the number of unemployed persons, as Chief has indicated, also increased by 179,000. And also we welcome the growth in some of the sectors like finance and community and social services and agriculture. But the real growth, we need the numbers, and the real numbers of employment will get in the manufacturing sectors, construction and trade and industry. Those are big multipliers, job multipliers that can create thousands of jobs and create, economic development and jobs for people. And I think we are lacking there about real economic growth with a lot of inhibitors. And number one, this energy crisis is disastrous for our country and on jobs.
Yeah. Chifipa, picking up from what Ashley is saying, I mean, if you look at it, we'll touch a little bit on some of the sectors and how they perform. But if overall we take a look, a lot of the jobs, 69.1% of them are coming from the formal sector. There are others who are arguing that if we are to see a lot of employment in South Africa, we should also be paying attention and giving support to the informal sector, because that is where there is a lot of room and scope for expansion and growth. But it seems as though, as a country, we are kind of letting the informal sector expand and grow on its own. What support should we be providing to that informal space?
Well, I think when one talks about the informal sector, I think one also has to look at it from the point of view of, well, which kind of sector within the informal sector itself. For instance, if you look at from the segmentation of the patterns, you will find that informal sector is more SMEs, so small medium enterprises, which means that there has to be more support in terms of entry point with regard to these sectors, segment of the economy into the big sectors of the economy. So, for instance, if we encourage more, much as you can take it from the informal side point of view, but I think taking them through into the SME sector from the financing point of view, that's one of the key areas which the government, I think, does also play a critical role. But not on the government point of view only, but also in the banking sector in terms of supporting the small, medium enterprises. So the informal sector actually is quite key if you define from the point of view of small enterprises. But I think the other thing that also needs to take place into consideration that when you're trying to create jobs in the formal sector, there's also issues of skills that it also needs to be looked at. So the skills patterns in terms of supporting the entry into the segment of the economy also remains a key element in terms of how the government and also the private sector can actually support in terms of driving skills in those sectors of the economy. But I think it's also very clear that women play a very critical role with regard to the informal sector of the economy. It's more a clear picture if you look at it from the African perspective in terms of all the economies, but also from the South African perspective. Now, when you look at the labor absorption rate, for example, in the women's segment, it's only sitting at 34.7%, which tells you that much as the economy is moving, but the absorption from the labor perspective in terms of women, it's actually very low if you compare to let's say, the men. So that's something also needs to be looked at. So unemployment rate also from the women's side point of view is quite high if you compare to the men's side. Yeah. So realistically, there has to be also intervention to support women own businesses in terms of entering both the formal as well as the informal sector of the economy. So those key elements, I think, need to be looked at in terms of support. Yeah. But I think my colleague actually mentioned about the youth unemployment and so forth. That's also an area which requires intervention to support youth-owned business into the both formal as well as the informal sector of the economy. I think if you cut across those kind of interventions from the financing, lending point of view, then I think we've got to do something in terms of trying to eradicate the situation which we are facing in terms of the unemployment segment, which is high among women, high among the youth, but also high among the black population.
Financing, lending point of view, I want us to zero in on what you said now around the skills. If you look at least in the last 10 years, it does seem, though, that graduate unemployment is also on the increase, increasing by 5.5% in the last 10 years, which means that there are some who are skilled who are also not getting employment.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think the element of, if you segment that across the components in terms of the skill base, you actually see that graduates are also really suffering. But I think if you compare the graduates as well as looking at, let's say, those with matric and less matric, then you find that realistically wise, what the figures are telling us that at least when you are a graduate, you have very high chances of getting employed in the South African economy. Because the graduates' unemployment rate sits at 2.7%. While if you don't have anything like matric level, which means that you actually highly likely to fall in the category of the 48.9% unemployment. So realistically, I think that's an area which has to be focused on. But I think to take you back into the issues of skills, not only do we have skills gap. If you look at some of the sectors of the economy, such as the manufacturing sector, especially the higher engineering side of the manufacturing sector, you will find that one of the biggest problems we also have is that we've got an aging workforce. So the pipeline in terms of bringing in most engineering skills into the sector, such as let's say the steel sector, is also one of the areas which need to be looked at. That's why you find that in those skill segments, there is a high unemployment rate in terms of youth, because the gap in terms of the skills gap between the aging workforce and the youth is quite high. And not only that, but also from the training point of view, that's an area which I think the industry also has to play a critical role in to ensure that the engineering skills being developed for the strong, high manufacturing sector, which requires high engineering skills, such as the steel sector.
Yeah. Ashley, I'm going to give you a chance. You can also respond on the question of finance, the question of skills, and the question of gender disparities that continue to persist in the sense of the scale being skewed unequally towards women. But out of 10.2 million young people aged between 15 and 24, 3.7 million of them are in that gap of not employed, not in education, and not in training. A marginal decrease is showing this time around this quarter of 0.9%. Is that significant? Is there something that you think we would have done differently there to see that kind of move?
The disparities of unemployment, it is always women that bears the brunt of unemployment. If you look at the numbers, you'll see women is normally, prejudiced when it comes to employment opportunities and jobs. But I don't think we have a problem with skills in the economy, in particular youth skills. And I think my colleague has indicated earlier that, there's a number of graduates that's actually unemployed. That shows you there is sufficient skill. And I think you just need to have a look at what the SETAs are doing in this country. There's TVET colleges, there's community colleges. I think in some respects the government is doing well in that regard, particularly the Department of Higher Education and Training and all the other supported institutions that deal with skills development. There's a huge pool of youth that's been trained through the SETAs, through learnerships, and we must not underestimate those type of skills. And it's predominantly young people, matriculants, those with no previous work experience, and they are ready to enter the job market. The challenge is, Tabu, is that the enabling environment is not there, and our government must take the blame for this. The enabling environment is not there so to absorb those jobs. Like I mentioned earlier, we are very concerned about the energy crisis. The load shedding is going to shed more jobs at the scale that we have never experienced in this country. We've received reports, and I'm sure you've seen the mainstream media, that Pick and Pay Group itself spent 300 million rand on diesel, but in 10 months. There are companies in manufacturing that we are involved with that spend on average 250,000 rand on diesel for backup generators, just to keep the lights on and the machines on, 250,000 rand a month. It is unsustainable. Apart from that, they're losing sales, they're losing revenue, and many businesses is now affected. We also heard reports that the number of companies going into business rescue and liquidations is going to increase the next couple of months. So it is absolutely scary. And the government is calling one commission after another commission, one investigation after another, instead of fixing the energy crisis. That is our biggest challenge that we are currently experiencing. And if it's not going to find quick solutions to this current problem, then I'm afraid that we're going to go backwards than pre-COVID levels. We've seen a positive trend of the economy and jobs moving closer to pre-COVID figures of 16.2, 16.4 million. But I'm afraid if we don't fix this energy crisis, then we're going to see a downturn in the economy that we haven't experienced in a long time.
Yeah. Energy crisis, big factor. Very clear to draw that bridge between a spike in unemployment and of course, the increase in load shedding. The other area, when you speak of the conducive environment, actually, is what young people are raising is the the barrier to entry remaining quite high. I'm talking here the cost of data, for example, being one of the issues that make the barrier to entry to remain high. The cost of transport, and one would say, I suppose, all that could also be linked to the energy crisis in a sense, because the more that continues, the more it becomes expensive and inflation kicks in and everything just becomes expensive, even for young people to get out of the house and make copies of CVs and send them to prospective employers.
I agree with you. That is our view as well as Fedusa. We think that there are other interventions that government can implement. It doesn't cost them an arm and a leg. Like I said, we have mentioned in the past that, I mean, you can develop a system whereby young, unemployed people can get access to public transport for free. And they can get onto a data, onto a network, and that will assist them and enable them to find jobs. Other ways, there are some community institutions like libraries and that has already got free Wi-Fi facilities and that can assist with that. But I think it needs to be rolled out on a much larger scale so that a bigger number of our unemployed youth, in particular rural areas. I don't think the urban areas and semi-urban areas is necessarily a problem with Wi-Fi and those networks. But the rural areas, the rural youth, I think their challenges are much more. And we've also seen that with the new district development model, we've seen that government is at least thinking of those type of areas, in particular rural communities whereby they're establishing community colleges, TVET colleges, as part of the strategy is to establish them in the rural areas so that the rural poor and unemployed youth can get access to education, access to data networks and that so that they can improve their lives. But yes, sometimes we talk too much and we do too little. You know, I always mention government talk left and they walk right, and that must stop. We need certainty, we need direction from our government, and that is what's lacking.
Very interesting that you say that. Would you say that this is what explains this phenomenon? Gauteng, Limpopo and the Western Cape recording the largest employment increase. I mean, you'd say Gauteng, I suppose the Western Cape, largely urban areas. But if you look at the Northwest, the highest expansion of unemployment rate at about 54%. Could it explain what you've just said now around those who are in urban areas having much easier access, I suppose, to data and things like that?
The data from the quarterly labor force survey, you'd find is normally your biggest provinces that have reported the highest growth numbers, like Gauteng, Western Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and others, Eastern Cape. So yes, normally your traditional rural provinces, and they have their own challenges and constraints. And by that itself, it's another barrier, you know, for economic growth and job creation. So your sort of bigger provinces always have the lion's share of growth because the investments and the infrastructure in particular, it's much better. And you'll also find that in those areas where unemployment is rife and it's high, is those municipalities there is in shambles. Municipalities, by its very nature, is also enablers of jobs, enablers of economic development. But if you look at the poor state of municipalities in South Africa, you'll find them in mostly rural provinces. That in itself exacerbates the crisis of unemployment.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. Chifipa Mhango staying with us is Economist, and Fedusa Deputy Secretary General Ashley Benjamin. And taking your thoughts on 072-110-5584. Do you think the quarterly labor force surveys assist us in understanding the unemployment environment? And are we doing anything about it? What are your thoughts tonight? We'll come back in a moment and touch a little bit on those sectors that have shown a degree of employment and what those numbers are telling us. We're back in a moment. Ashley, let's look at this and what you think it says. High employment share relative to their GDP contribution. This sector's seemingly doing well. Trade contributing 20.7%, while their GDP share is sitting at 14.3%. Construction, 7.6%, while their GDP share sits at 2.4%. Agriculture, 5.4%, while their GDP share sits at 1.5%. What do these numbers show us?
It's challenging, these sectors are good for growth, and it's good that we've seen the positive numbers. But as I mentioned earlier, where one wants to see the real numbers is in your labor-intensive sectors, like your transport, your manufacturing, your mining, and those areas. Those are big job spinners, and it's big economic contributors because it has a ripple effect on the economy. We are not discarding the jobs in the 4 sectors that you've seen that's been grown, agriculture and that. But normally, when one talk about a country with a big unemployment crisis like South Africa, you must invest, and the quickest way of alleviating poverty and unemployment is through investment in particular infrastructure development, which we've seen the last couple of years, has contributed significantly to job creation in the country and job opportunities, but equally in the manufacturing sector. And these are the sectors that now under threat as a result of in particular, the energy crisis that we are currently faced with.
Yeah, it's very difficult to even ask, what support do you offer these sectors? Because, if you look at mining, even though a lot of mining companies are now coming up with their own solutions to the energy deficiencies, but a lot of companies are not prospecting in South Africa, largely because of that challenge of energy. Because if you want to do mining, you need a lot of energy. But what other support would these manufacturing sector, mining and construction, should they be given in order for them at least to begin to make a significant difference?
The challenge is, Thabo, if you look at currently the high interest rates. Our interest rate is at an all-time high, and we've seen for the past couple of months, the South African Reserve Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee has been raising interest rates at an alarming rate. That is what we don't need currently in this country. The energy crisis compounded with high interest rates is just the recipe for disaster. Many, as I've mentioned earlier, already struggling businesses, the cost of capital is increasing. Access to capital has increased. And then you sit with another burden of not being able to keep the lights on, and many companies doesn't have the means to install solar or backup generators, which in itself is costly. I think that further contributes to low economic growth in our country. So these are serious inhibitors that makes our economy not to grow at a desired pace, and that ultimately leads to an economic slowdown. We've seen the forecast of the International Monetary Fund. Our own Reserve Bank's forecast is not so good for our economy, and therein lies the challenge. Low economic growth will lead to low investment, low job creation. It's got a ripple effect on the economy.
Ashley Benjamin, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Fedusa's Deputy Secretary General there, weighing in on the latest numbers.